Hello, everyone. We're just going to give it a minute to allow Zoom to let everyone to trickle in. And if you're joining us from Vancouver, I hope you have a cup of tea or some coffee or something warm for comfort on this very rainy Saturday afternoon. Okay, hello and welcome to today's live from the studio with Chad Wong, a BIPOC Lens artist in residence at Griffin Art Projects. My name is Bahar Mohazebnia, and I'm the Assistant Curator of Engagement at Griffin Art Projects. Thank you so much for joining us today. Before we begin, we would like to acknowledge that our work takes place on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of the Tsleil-Waututh and Squamish nations, to whom we are deeply grateful. I would also like to thank North Vancouver Recreation and Culture and the Fryby Foundation for their generous support of Griffin's residency programs. This event is part of the 2024 Caption Photography Festival events program. And lastly, I'll mention that at the end of today's presentation, there will be a chance for audience Q&A. So if at any point throughout the presentation you have a question for Chad, please feel free to type it in the Q&A dialog box. You can also raise your hand and ask your question out loud. We won't be able to see you, but we will be able to hear your voice. And just to note that today's event is being recorded, so your voice will be recorded as well. And without further ado, I will introduce Chad. As a visual artist based in Vancouver, Chad Wong explores the majority of his work through the lens of a first-generation Chinese-Canadian immigrant. His artistic expression can be described as photo-based conceptualism with a focus on identity and nostalgia. Chad's artistic practice aims to explore and examine the diverse intricacies of the Chinese-Canadian identity within Greater Vancouver through the documentation of shared cultural spaces, particularly Chinese-Canadian shopping malls and plazas. Chad Wong's residency has culminated in a 3-day exhibition at the Griffin Residency space, taking place right now. As part of the 2024 Capture Photography Festival, this exhibition will be ongoing from today and tomorrow from noon to 5, 1180 Welt Street in North Vancouver, Studio B. I'll link to it at the end of the presentation. So feel free to come by and see the work in person. Chad's project, I Live Here, strives to confront the complexities of memory, longing, and remembrance. This work is an homage to the resilience of individuals in the face of adversity and a testament to the enduring power of images to bridge time, distance, and the boundaries of our own lives. And with that, Chad, I pass it on to you.
Thank you. Let me just... Hi, everyone. Welcome. I would also like to thank the BC Arts Council for funding my exhibition. I first want to kind of go over the somewhat complicated history of Hong Kong, just for those who might not be familiar, to add a little bit of context. So in 1997, Hong Kong was officially handed back over to China under the conception of a one country, two system with a semi-autonomous region for Hong Kong. And so that kind of set the stage for a city that was used to a little bit more autonomy and certain degrees of freedom that was not afforded to, say, many Chinese citizens who were living in China. And then I kind of want to just fast forward to maybe a little bit of history of Hong Kong's history of protests and unrest, and also like so in 2000, this is a slide, this is a video, this is a photo from 2003, And this is one of the first big protests that took place on the annual July 1st protests in Hong Kong. And this was to basically to subvert the Article 23 that was being proposed at the time, which drastically limited the political and freedoms of the people of Hong Kong. And so there's a big history of protests and people voicing their concerns on the streets of Hong Kong. And a little bit more context, this is the 2014 umbrella movement. This was one of the biggest at the time civil unrest in Hong Kong. And it was also part of the Occupy movement, specifically called the Occupy Central movement. And this is where we first see the motif of the yellow umbrella as a sign of defiance in Hong Kong. And fast forward to 2019, this is basically everything from before led up to this big breaking point during the presentation of a extradition bill. This first one was March 31st, where thousands of Hong Kongers took the street to oppose the extradition bill. And as it gained more and more momentum, this photo that you see is from June 12th. And this is one of the biggest protests at the time. I think reportedly there's about 500,000 people that were there on the streets. And of course, there were subsequent crackdowns. In here, you see the demonstration at the Hong Kong airport. And you can see like it's mostly peaceful. It's people who are here to voice their concerns. And they were met with violence, state-sanctioned violence, with tear gas and rubber bullets. The slide before, I just kind of want to show that the protesters, they were very efficient in terms of any kind of thing that would maybe say block ambulances. And so you can see protesters like organizing themselves to let ambulances through so that they can perform their duties. So yeah, we'll come back to here. This is June 12th, one of the big protests at the time. And one of the this is the turning point, I would say, for most Hong Kongers to see that their government would do something like that. More violence from the Hong Kong police. And I want to take us to the first project that I had that I wanted to confront the protests and everything that happened, because I was so far away from the protests at the time. I was still in Vancouver. I was trying to reconcile with the fact that I might no longer be able to go back to the city. And so Empty Spaces That Fill My Heart are a series of photos that I took in and around Richmond and Greater Vancouver, places that reminded me of Hong Kong. And a lot of these spaces, they were occupied and owned and used by Hong Kong and Chinese migrants alike in Canada. So a lot of these places were quite nostalgic to me, but also reminded me of Hong Kong, a place that I feel like maybe I can no longer head back to. And so this is my first, um, my initial way of confronting everything that happened. I'll just show you another slide of one of the Hong Kong Canadian malls that I had photographed for that series. Um, and it also was part of the 2022 Capture Photo Fest. This one, they're outside Aberdeen, Aberdeen Station. And so it's kind of these images of that area existing in that area. So I really want people to um, have that connection between like the Chinese Canadian experience and the Hong Kong Canadian experience, and to try to bring them back to maybe a place that they can no longer head back to. And that was the conception of the project. And fast forward to 2023, this was, it took a couple of years for me to figure out how I exactly wanted to confront these images of the protest. I think at the time it was really hard for everybody who lived overseas to see what was going on in Hong Kong, um, especially being so helpless, um, not being able to be there. Um, so a huge inspiration was actually, I was going through some old artist talks uh, with Richard Prince, and he's somebody who had reappropriated images and photos and recontextualized them. And so I thought this was something that I could work with so that I could work with these images in a more personal way. And so I would kind of call this series a redocumentation series. I reappropriated existing footage from the protests and to kind of show that distance between myself and the events. I had re-photographed these images through my camera, through the screen, through my camera. So there's these multiple layers of mediation. So yeah, the title "I Live Here" most is a reference to one of the videos that were archived, and it's a man just he's standing there and saying, "I live here." You know, like he's trying to head back home, but the police weren't letting him, and so he's saying, "I live here," and I felt that that really resonated with not just the fact that I live in Hong Kong, but also I live here in Vancouver, unable to um, do anything except for to helplessly watch the violence unfold in front of my eyes. And images you're seeing right now, they're part of the exhibition. Most of them, in the end, I ended up taking close to about like 500 photos. Um, and it really came down to the editing process. Um, I remember just flipping through a lot of these photos and kind of trying to figure out which ones I wanted to pick. And in the end, it came down to the ones that I remember specifically where I was when I shot, when I saw these footage for the first time. And it was quite tough emotionally. And so I think these images in the end, they were the ones that I felt was the most personal and would resonate with other overseas Hong Kongers who also felt the same way. Um, so yeah, that is the project. I do want to say that uh, having the chance to work at Griffin has been really great. Um, it's just nice to have like a space to open up my practice and to also exhibit the work. Um, yeah, so I'll hand it back over to Bahar for Q&A.
Great. Thank you, Chad. Thank you for sharing your work with us. It's timely. I'll say it's never not, but especially in this particular moment, it's can be just, jarring to see the universalities of resistance amongst people and the bravery of protesters, of professors, of individuals, of artists, and everyone who's sort of coming together to resist against forces that are much, much more powerful than them.
Absolutely.
Um, yeah, I'll invite the audience to type away their questions in the Q&A, but in the meantime, I'll start with the first questions. Resonated a lot of things for me that are personal. I also come from a diasporatic experience. I also, when I do things, I think about, will this affect me being able to go back to my own home country? So I see the universality in this project, even though it's so personal for you and it's also such a regional project, but its roots and its core, something that can be applied through many kinds of diasporas and many types of resistance and activist groups. And I'm looking at your work and thinking about art making as being something that is inherently political.
Yeah.
It's historically, art history has been something where its roots are an act of resistance against a certain set of norms or a certain set of prescriptions. So I'm just wondering where you see specifically this project going forward and your work in this sort of larger scope of activism.
Mhm. I kind of see myself not so much of an activist. I think like the work that they're doing is much more brave than the work that I'm presenting. Like, I feel like the work that I'm presenting right now is more of a um, more of a personal response to everything that's happened, and I do want to see it um, within the context, or maybe slightly outside the context of a gallery. I think as if it exists as like a public art, it would be quite interesting given the demographic of um, Vancouver. Um, I think that could be quite interesting, but I do think like um, this is kind of this is an anchor to my overall work, to my relationship with Hong Kong and how I see the city and how maybe perhaps after this exhibition I can go back to the city and how the images moving forward, if I were to construct images regarding Hong Kong, how that would look like
Mhm.
and what that would mean. And that's kind of how I see it for now. Yeah.
Yeah, and could you speak a little bit about your choice in selecting the subject matter? I know you spoke a little bit about the the shopping malls and the plazas, but is what draws you to them and that sort of feeling of nostalgia and there's sort of liminal spaces too for us, for someone who,
Yeah.
doesn't have really a purpose to be
Yeah.
there, but
Yeah. Um, I think it definitely came from like a sense of loss and a sense of wanting to return. A lot of those spaces I frequented as a kid, and I still do sometimes. Um, so like they hold a lot of memory, especially because they were such a big part of how I would be able to connect with the culture that my family are from. Um, so that's why I picked a lot of those spaces. Um, yeah.
And the archival footage that's in the exhibition, could you speak a little bit more about that? I saw snippets of it, and it seemed to be this sort of amalgamation of protests here and in Hong Kong as well.
Actually, all of the uh, footage they're all from Hong Kong, and they're all gathered from webarchive.org. Um, yeah, when I first started this project, it was actually really hard to go through all the videos because it was so just emotionally charged. Um, and everything was so explicit as well. Um, so the one that you're seeing now, that's actually a footage or the footage of came from the direct POV of a journalist. Um, and what you're seeing in front is the helmet of a police officer who is beating the journalist with a baton. Um, so a lot of this project also has to do with like that idea of wanting to be there and not being able to. So some of the images that I ended up photographing were POV images as well. And just to kind of excise that feeling of guilt of not being able to um, participate within the within the protest proper.
Mhm. Yeah, there's definitely a sense of guilt that comes with seeing your fellow citizens abroad somewhere. It is very emotionally charged as well. It's definitely a binary feeling of guilt and wanting to do everything you can while you're here, but trying to support
Yeah,
family and loved ones abroad. We have a
yeah.
question from Lisa. Chad, you've also spoke of the aesthetics of protest imagery and how you have carefully shaped the current capture exhibition happening at Griffin in terms of making this evident. Can you also comment on how these images function in popular culture and how they relate, for example, to your earlier research on popular television shows and how they inscribe urban space, as protests also inscribe them?
Mhm. Um, it's a very good question. I think like the aesthetics of protest imagery, I think it was it was really hard to kind of toe the line between aestheticizing an image of this protest because it is so political and it's so emotionally charged. So a lot of the images that I ended up photographing were, um, like I said, like uh, they mostly were images that I thought resonated with me emotionally. And I think in the greater context of like protest images, because there were so many images coming out of this protest, and they were they already had some kind of ascribed uh, story to them, so to speak. So I didn't want to necessarily have images that were so iconic to the point where people um, would recognize right away. And so a lot of it is really comes down to like um, how personal I felt with those moments and how I felt when I saw them back in 2019 and then uh, rewatching them again as well in 2023 when I created this project. Um, yeah, and kind of in response to the popular television shows, um, that was something I was working on in Griffin um, that had to do with not kind of it's I would say it is more of the next step to the project. I live here, and uh, like I said, like I was mentioning, I feel like it's very difficult for me to go back to Hong Kong, and so I was trying to reach back into images that I could still access of that city and how much these shows and these media shaped my conception of Hong Kong and the city as well. And so that was something that I was working on as kind of, I wouldn't say antidote, but more like a response to I live here because I live here is so connected to the protest and it's a huge part of the city now. Um, and but I do think like my relationship with Hong Kong has changed so much since the protest. And the inability to go back to the city is, I feel like, going to inform my work so much more um, than, say, a couple of years ago. And how I want to continue to make work about that city has also changed.
Definitely an internal back and forth, but it is
Mm.
reflected in your work. And Lisa says, "Thank you so much, Chad." Well, there's no other questions. Thank you, Chad, and thank you to all for joining us today. Oh, actually, one more question before jumping off. Lisa's wondering if you might be willing to share the installation and the exhibition with the audience today.
Yeah, definitely. I can just very quickly grab my laptop.
So we get a sneak preview.
There is a video that was there that is from Vancouver, Hong Kong activists, and they're part of the exhibition just to give a little bit more context to people who maybe they're not as familiar with the protests in Hong Kong, and and also who might not be familiar with the activism that's been happening in Vancouver as well regarding the liberation of Hong Kong.
Yeah, the video was a really great anchor to the exhibition because the photographs they're a bit abstract and it takes a while
Yeah,
to really comprehend what they're doing. But with the video there, it's not simplifying, but it's giving an introduction to an audience that might not be as familiar with the history. And for the audience that might be, it's sort of nuancing and fleshing out sort of the radical action with this sort of more abstract, less right off the bat giveaway of what's happening in the action. And Lisa says, Chad, the grid is so interesting here. Your choice to then also feature some of the work individually and then include them in the monitor. The video is very powerful and it demonstrates this video connects the demonstration in both countries and introduces the live and present risk of the protesters.
yeah, um, yeah. I think the the choice for the grid was the presentation of all the photos. I think like initially I wanted to do like more of a more of a um, linear thing. But in the end, I think the grid worked out with the one photo on the side, just because it doesn't read as much as like a linear story throughout the protest, especially because, that during the time in 2019, we were receiving all of these things like here and there, like there are, videos from, couple of days before, and like things were not as linear as like at all. So that was something that I kind of wanted to echo within the exhibition as well. And I think um, having that one particular one in by itself in the wall also kind of gave it a little bit more reverence, I suppose. Um, yeah,
Yeah, it definitely speaks to the fractured way we receive information. And at
yeah,
times it's the question of what information do we trust and
yeah,
how are we getting it? Where are we getting it from? And I think yeah, the way you've exhibited the exhibition with the wall and the grid as sort of the first thing you come in as an anchor, and then you sort of move through the space and you're struck with the singular photograph, and then you go to the video for a more, in-depth um, view. And it's been wonderful to work with you, Chad, over the past 2 months. And it's always so exciting to see when artists and residents come and produce such incredible work. And just want to thank you again. It's been a pleasure.
thank you for
Um,
having me. It's
of
been a really,
course.
really wonderful experience.
Great. Yes. And thank you to all for joining us today live from the studio with Chad Wong. And as mentioned at the top of the presentation, and as we just got a sneak preview of, Chad Wong's feature exhibition, I Live Here, is on view now at Griffin Art Project's residency space, and that's at 1180 Welch Street in North Vancouver, BC. And the exhibition is open today and tomorrow from 12 to 5 p.m. We would love to see you there. And a reminder that Griffin has our ongoing exhibition until May 5th. So Intersecting Orbits, Michael Morris and Joan Balzar, you have this weekend and next weekend to come see that too. And we are also open through Friday through Sunday, noon to 5. Thanks, everyone. Oh, and on May 5th, there will also be a tour of the exhibition, not Chad's exhibition, Intersecting Orbits. Michael Morris and Joan Balzar in Farsi. So if you're a Farsi speaker, come join me and have a tour of our exhibition. Thanks, everyone. Enjoy the rest of your Saturday.